Richard Clifford, Director of Solutions at Keysource, discusses ways in which the data center industry can address its net zero obligations with a range of technology and strategy innovations. In particular, he believes that next-generation edge, with data centers being constructed and integrated into local communities, offers some significant sustainability benefits, so long as all the stakeholders understand the opportunity.
Okay, so we have the contrast, I suppose, that during the pandemic, the data centers and the IT industry more generally was heralded as the sort of fourth emergency service. They were the heroes, or one of the heroes of the pandemic. And then as soon as that went away, they're back to being the bad people, the power-hungry people that stop housing developments getting built and stuff like that. So how do you sort of square those two perspectives, if it's possible to?
Yeah, I guess a lot of people didn't know about the industry before the pandemic. So when everyone was relying on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all that sort of stuff, people started to realise that they relied on that more, working from home, and that whole kind of mantra of transformation and culture. But also, I think in terms of being able to get to a vaccination, so quickly, I don't think that would have been possible without the help of supercomputers and data centers, right? So it's all about number crunching, and so that was the good news story, and that wave carried us sort of through the end of that pandemic, which was, and then sort of abruptly ended when everyone started to look at, realised we were there and realised that we consumed so much power, and they just looked at the numbers. Sometimes we don't do ourselves a lot of favours because we're trying to, the operators are trying to sell that space. Therefore, they want to advertise as much megawatts as they can. And then it kind of, becomes much more of a spotlight for the negative reasons. And I guess the recent kind of discussion points have been around water usage, and then the, power moratoriums and stopping builds. There was, 2022 with Dublin and Amsterdam, and then recently West London, where there were Thames were looking into water usage from data centres, and also there were complaints from sort of residential developers saying that we can't build houses because data centres have gone and kind of like done a land grab on the power effectively. So it's sort of this kind of full circle, and I guess the publicity around this has been picked up by the tabloids, and so you're seeing things now in the Financial Times and the Telegraph, on the BBC. Panorama did the piece around, I think it was something along the lines of how the cloud is killing Earth. It's sort of this catastrophizing and exaggeration of who we are. But again, I think we need to get better at marketing ourselves and obviously moving forward on our kind of net zero strategies, because there's lots of great initiatives. It's just how do we position that? And I think there's only been a few bits of positive press recently to try and turn the tide. There's a lot around obviously district heating, and there are some both sustainable and community projects such as the Deep Green project, who are supporting local community services with the waste heat from the high performance computing. So it's sort of, again, we can see the industry sort of fighting back, I suppose.
Yeah, and does the industry need to point out at some stage that the digital age we're in demands data centers and more of them to do everything? You mentioned Netflix, all that, mobile devices, all of that needs supporting. That's what data centers do. But at the same time, everyone's expecting these data centers to use no power or green power or be completely sustainable. So are those two objectives, if you like, unrestricted digital devices, access, whatever you want, whenever you want, is that compatible with completely sustainable data centers, which you're in theory wanting less of them and using far less power? Do the two work together?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So I think, again, people's understanding of what data centers are there to do. So there's, I think, a basic level, but I don't think they appreciate how much they rely on data. Data is, in essence, another utility like water, electricity, and so we rely on it to run our businesses, to run our lives. And so, absolutely, I think we need to talk more about what they're doing, what they're there for. We're very secretive. We're not, there are a lot of NDAs and things that prevent us from talking about what's happening in the facilities. But I think certainly we need to communicate better about what those are and how they affect the general populace, and therefore they can appreciate and understand if you can't just switch them off, and they are an essential part of modernising our lives, because they do provide benefit. I guess there's also you hear about the negatives as well. Things like Bitcoin mining, and people jump on that bandwagon too, right? So, and I think in terms of the sustainability angle, there is for me, there's a sort of a vision of how we link in and how we deal with data centers and developing data centers moving forward. I think there's more of an approach to decentralize, and therefore spread out that kind of community benefit from our heat reuse, and to support not just like local community services, but also to assist with fuel poverty and in key areas. So linking up and aligning data center development with district heating networks, I think is a key thing, and is something that I think should be driven by us, but also by, I think, the government, who have obviously got their own targets for net zero.
Yeah, I mean, the data center industry, a lot of it, probably the majority, if not all, talks a good game around net zero. But are there words being turned into actions, or do you still think there's a bit of a disjoint? And I suppose as a sort of supplementary to that, is it possible for people to head to net zero by sort of evolution, tinkering around what they're doing, or as you've alluded to with the waste heat reuse, potentially is more of a revolution required, where they've got to sort of almost throw out today's handbook as to how to build and operate a data center and completely rethink the whole process? Just your thoughts on that.
So there's no magic wand, so we can't wave a wand and suddenly be net zero, and it's not one answer that solves the equation. Certainly from the perspective of the new investment coming into our industry, it requires green credentials, and so it's a prerequisite. That's been a change obviously over the last sort of 2 to 3 years. That's driving the change in design, and so we're designing with fully understanding scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. We're doing carbon impact assessments on facilities. We're understanding the embodied carbon from the manufacturing process all the way through the whole life cycle. And we're seeing, certainly a lot more initiatives like that, even getting into the detail of looking at where engineers are based and trying to avoid sort of international travel for the carbon associated with it. So there's much more of a holistic view and understanding of the detail of the life cycle carbon. I think certainly, that's the new builds. There's a huge opportunity there where facilities are running still at 25 to 40% capacity, and they're legacy facilities, right? So we're building new ones. We focus on building the new ones, but there are so many legacy sites out there that need life cycle refresh and reconsidering what their purpose is. And potentially we can repurpose those for new, more modern facilities to avoid the kind of embodied carbon of constructing new projects. There's also an exciting opportunity, I think, with some people call them like zombie buildings around sort of metropolitan cities, where there's the potential for more edge data centers, again, on that line of distributed computing. And even certainly there's a lot of talk about immersed high performance computing, liquid cooling, whatever you want to refer to it as. But even the lower grade air cooled compute provides a really valuable commodity to those metropolitan communities, because what you're seeing is what's referred to often as the electrification of buildings. And that's all about the use of heat pumps and moving away from fossil fuels and then onto electric heating throughout buildings. And so it's far easier to incorporate this low grade heat and to prime those heat pumps. So again, how can we reuse existing buildings, incorporate district heating networks? Again, not just follow the the herd, so to speak. Everyone tends to build in the same place, land, expand. It's a low risk opportunity there. I think a little bit of rethinking and spreading that out. I think that distributed computing isn't going to happen overnight. Like, it's a slow process, and there are still going to be the large campuses that are hyperscalers. And I think in terms of the route to net zero there, and to avoid the negativity around sort of impact to community and impact on the environment, there's going to be more of a drive around where either renewable sources are connected, so direct wire, even potentially the use of micro nuclear reactors, which the likes of Rolls-Royce, which can do two things to sort of help our industry. One in the form of the production of green hydrogen, which is a much better sustainable fuel source when produced in the right way. And the second being that they can provide direct wire renewable energy for the environment. So two sides of that, which is the embodied carbon in their design and construction and how we consider that, and then how we locate our facilities for district heating and potentially for connection to renewable energy sources, ideally by direct wire.
Yeah, and in terms of the district heating side, which is using what I guess is described as the waste heat from the data center, you referenced there Deep Green. I think they're working with swimming pools in particular. Is that right, to provide that? But what do you see as the potential there? I mean, do you see? I think you Keysource have coined the sort of next generation edge as the term. You suggesting, I don't know, that every town should have a data center sort of in the middle that's therefore then providing quite a lot of district heat. What's practical, I suppose? What do you think might be achievable?
Yeah, I think Deep Green are a great example because they've received a lot of publicity, and swimming pools are one part of it. They're an obvious struggling community service that's vital for our towns, villages, cities, and it's well publicised how they're struggling. So it's quite easy for people to comprehend the benefit. Because it makes it's keeping these facilities open, but they're also obviously approaching district heating networks, as are many other data center operators. But their focus and their model is purely on environmental sustainability and community, which is slightly different, I think. So, but in terms of exactly that next generation edge, absolutely. We think about the negativity in the press and what we're seeing around. The land grab on power, so to speak, stranglehold on power, vampire data centers, water usage, all of these negatives. And actually, if we go down the route of distributed computing, we avoid, strangling one community or one area. We also spread the benefit. So if we suddenly drop 100 megawatts of heating in an area, we might not be able to use it all, right? So the data centers aren't often in a place that's easy to connect onto a district heating network. They're often in industrial areas, and obviously the further the heat has to travel, the more there are losses. And so actually, close proximity to a district heating network, smaller footprints so that they don't make a huge visual impact, and also smaller power increments will mean that they can integrate nicely within communities, and they can provide a benefit to the community in either helping to solve fuel poverty within lower income areas, helping to keep community services open with the likes of the swimming pools, schools, etc. Again, it's just changing the mindset from one of build big, build in the same place, to a more distributed model that thinks about the environment, thinks about the community, and thinks about how we can change our image as an industry to keep the community services open and be, help to kind of overcome that blocker when it comes to people's perceptions.
And in terms of the data center ecosystem that would need to make that happen, you referenced government, I think, earlier. So you've got, I guess, national government, then you've got local governments, you've got the construction industry, then the owners, operators, etc. Do you think everyone? I mean, I'm just, for example, I mean, often you find that local planners don't necessarily grasp, whether it's green roofs, they don't all get those, or whatever. Can you imagine a scenario where if they're not properly educated, they're like, well, we don't want a data center in our town, or whatever, that's going to be bad. So is there a big education process needed first to get all the stakeholders sort of on side, or do you think they would fairly readily understand the benefits and not put up too many obstacles?
Yeah, I think planners are an interesting topic. They can obviously vary from area to area. I've heard mixtures of everything from, like you said, I don't want a data center in my area. They've read the negativity and the negative press, to recent cases where historically maybe planning applications from 10 years ago required district heating connection points. Recent planning approvals haven't required district heating. So data centers are doing it because it's the right thing to do and because their clients are requiring it of them. But sometimes planners are missing a trick. And so absolutely, education is required. We need to lobby government. Government needs to align, I think, the houses in terms of, all developments need to require a district heating network first off. The district heating networks should be looking for a framework of reliable heat sources, of which data centers are one. And then obviously there's an incentive there to drive a change in behaviour for our industry as well, to relocate away from the same areas, the Sloughs, the Hemels, etc., into more metropolitan areas. So, change happens from the top. Change happens with regulation. We're seeing that with the energy efficiency directive that's coming out for anything that's over 100 kilowatts, I think. And actually, that starts from May and it's retrospective. So again, it's this whole thing about, people running to catch up with the bus that's already, the train that's already left the station. People need to get on board, but let's be realistic. The government needs to be lobbied and educated on the value. They need to understand the benefits, and then it needs to be coordinated by our industry and also by the government to flow down into planning. Planning processes need to change, and they need to be clear, right? So, planners can pick it up and they understand, and developers know they need to deploy a district heating network and then find a reliable heat source. At the moment, it sort of seems to be happening around the edges and maybe happening more by chance rather than by coordination and structure. So I think that, let's say, that change is going to happen from the top, but requires a lot of effort from today.
Okay, so in terms of, I think you've outlined the broad plan, but in terms of specific next actions and time frames, do you think the ball is in the industry's court that it needs to get itself together and go lobby government as a whole industry, or maybe it's already doing that and say, look, this is what needs to happen, and we are the good guys and we can be even better, if you like, because for all these reasons, and then the government gets it? Or do you think the government already understands, or do you just worry that there's maybe a bit of bureaucracy in there that it won't quite happen as fast as it needs to? Just your thoughts as to what in an ideal world would be, what would be the sort of 3 or 4 point plan, bish, now it's all happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the industry, Tech UK, have done a great job over the years of lobbying government, certainly through COVID and the periods after. Emma Fryer especially had done a sterling job of raising the profile of our industry. I think that fight needs to continue, and we need to, I think we need to kind of help to outline what that framework might look like, develop that framework and bring it to them, so it's easier to move on that change. But it's politics, right? And we've seen I can't remember how many prime ministers over the last couple of years. So change is constant, and progress is slow, I think, is probably the unfortunate reality. And so we can get our house in order as an industry, and we can make sure we're ready to connect onto district heating networks, and we can think about our embodied carbon and location, and how we can be more aligned with communities and benefit communities, and at the same time, through bodies like Tech UK, together lobby for change, and hopefully we'll see that over the next sort of 2 to 3 years. There are certainly funds independent funds that are coming to the market, the UK market, looking at expanding district heating networks themselves. And so again, there's investment coming in, there's recognition for more district heating networks. There are drivers around district heating networks. Again, it's just, how do we flag those? How do we align our industry with those projects that are already underway?
And I suppose just finally to sort of put it the other way, is it possible, do you think, for the data center industry to get to net zero, truly, true sustainability without district heating, microgrids, whatever, becoming a major part of the strategy moving forward?
So I think in terms of the possibilities and what's in our control, it's not all in our control. In reality, we draw on power from the grid, and so we're only as sustainable as the grid. That's a common factor. There are locations where you can see that there's a greater mix of renewables, and so you can kind of connect there. But equally, most people are getting like a PPA as a way of being green, so they're paying for that green energy. In reality, are they getting it? Is it more like carbon credits and it's like an offset? So I think there's still here elements where we're trying to make the change, we're trying to make the leap, but it's outside of our control today. And so we need those microgrids or direct wire connections for renewables to make that change and to solve the whole piece of the pie. But the things that are in our control are doing the embodied carbon impact assessments, are looking at the life cycle carbon, are making decisions about procuring equipment and infrastructure, not based on the cheapest price, but based on where it's coming from, how it's built, what materials are used, how efficient it is. And there are many people out there, many operators that are doing that good work. And talking to Telehouse just yesterday, and they've put a lot of effort into developing their Telehouse South site with that whole embodied carbon life cycle in mind. So certainly operators are looking at it, and certainly there's a huge portion of that pie in our control. I think from the recent Sustainability Revolution breakfast briefing we did, the stat was about 51% of all carbon was embodied carbon. So in the manufacturing process, in the build process, built into the infrastructure. And so that's the bit that we can definitely tackle. And then obviously we can help to make sure we're continually improving the operation of our facilities and optimizing them from an energy efficiency perspective. That's definitely in our control. And there are areas that we're going to look at. Generators are still one of those legacy things. They're absolutely essential for the availability of our industry. We still rely on them. And there isn't today a tangible alternative to that, right? So that's why people are relying on PPAs, deploying HVO oil in engines, because those are things that we can reach out and grab today to make a change. And we're keen to do that. And hopefully over the next 3-5 years, we'll see something to move away from those type of generators, maybe into hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen fuel generators, whatever it might be, that comes down the road that's more sustainable. But today, the availability of hydrogen or green hydrogen is just not there. So it's not affordable. It's not available in significant quantities to make a difference. So loads of great initiatives. Some things outside of our control. Again, that means lobbying. That means looking at geography. That means thinking outside the box, and looking down the road in the next 3 to 5 years, and looking for that innovation that's going to answer the whole the final pieces of the pie, so to speak.
Okay, it's been fantastic to chat to you and shared some great insights. So, Richard, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Phil. It's good to speak to you.